Okay, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. This is a webinar that we've got many requests for. And so we teamed up with the best, and we have the Brighton Center here, and they're here to answer all your hard questions. They are here to help you. And if you have any questions, please go ahead and hold them until they have an open area where they ask questions in the end. So, so bring out your notepads and let's get ready for this. Okay, Garisol, and then we have Alejandro. You guys, wait. So I don't know, how do you guys want to start this?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and get started for today. First of all, thank you guys for having Girasol and myself for this webinar today. And primarily what I'll be speaking about is distance learning, since I feel like that's really pertinent to what a lot of us parents are living at the moment, regardless of where our children are. I feel like some of us have experienced distance learning in one sense or the other. And some of us are going to continue to experience distance learning with our kiddos during this pandemic. So, I'm going to talk about what distance learning is for parents, talking about the big ask that it is, because it is a big ask of parents, and it takes a lot for parents to implement distance learning effectively. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and then I'll talk about asking for an ARD meeting to make sure that the documentation is up to speed. And then I'll be talking lastly about preparing data for that meeting. But yeah, like was mentioned before, if you do have a question, go ahead and use the chat feature, and we'll try to answer those questions either at the end of our presentation or as needed. But I'll go ahead and get started with distance learning. And before I talk about distance learning, just to give you a little bit of my background, I was in education for 6 years. 4 as a general education teacher, 2 years as a special education teacher and special education coordinator for a school in Austin, and then moved back down to San Antonio, where I've been with Brighton Center for the last 2 years as a special education advocate. So I have a kind of a unique perspective in that I've worked with children with disabilities in the school level, and obviously now as an advocate, I've worked with families on the other side of the curtain to ensure that we're bridging that communication gap with schools, and that we're working hard for families to get the services that your children are entitled to based on their needs. So just a little bit of background on me, just so you guys don't think I'm just someone off the street that's talking gibberish. But first thing is first, distance learning, right? We've all kind of experienced this during this pandemic, and the first thing that I like for parents to think about is, distance learning isn't for everybody. It's not going to work for everybody, and it really is a big ask for parents. Parents really have to be very engaged and have to have all hands on deck for distance learning in order for it to succeed. As much as I would like for the school to do everything to make this a seamless process, parents really do need to have all hands on deck and be active participants in this process for it to work. So, one thing that I always tell my clients and I tell my families is you need to change your perspective on distance learning and change your perspective on what it's going to take for you as a parent to make sure that your child is learning at 100%, given the circumstances. So first and foremost, you have to take that responsibility, shift your mindset, and be a willing and able participant in the process, as long as a partner with the school. And a lot of times, and I hear our clients that come to our office, or right now during the pandemic, we have these conversations with our families over Zoom. But a lot of times, families come in and say, Alex, so the school's not doing anything, my kid's not learning anything during distance learning. And then I ask the question, well, how is the environment set up at your home? What are you doing to ensure that your child is learning? And so when we ask these probing questions, families sometimes give us answers that kind of contradict their level of commitment, or maybe open their eyes as to, wow, yeah, I haven't really been an active participant. I need to step my game up. Because again, it's not the ideal setting for distance learning, right? I think that if it was up to us and this pandemic wasn't occurring, we would all want our children to be in school as much as possible. But obviously, given your child's needs and maybe your circumstances at home, distance learning is going to be the only method that's going to work for you. So the first thing is, first, you have to take that responsibility and ownership of the educational experience for your child, because really nobody else is going to in the school, because your home is your school, and it's your home at this point. So again, just take that responsibility and understand that if you're going to go down the distance learning route, that it's going to be a big ask of you, and it is going to be a lot of work. It's going to be a lot of sleepless nights. It's going to be a lot of you doing the heavy lifting, because the school can only do so much virtually. And it's unfair kind of to put the 100% blame on the school. Now, I love to give schools the benefit of the doubt, being a former educator, but that doesn't mean that I'm 100% on their side. If the schools and educators and administrators did their job, I wouldn't be an advocate. I wouldn't be on this side of the fence doing the work that I do. So again, I completely empathize and understand where families are coming from, but I also see it from the teacher perspective, because these teachers were kind of thrown in this situation with very little help from the district, very little help from TEA. And they're having to do an incredible job of trying to educate our children, specifically our children with special needs, who require more attention and more services than the general education population. And it's asking of them a very difficult and almost impossible task. So, keep that into consideration as well when you're communicating with your teachers. They're doing the best that they can. Even though sometimes when you're having a conversation with them, it may seem like they're brushing you off or they're not giving you the attention. They have hundreds of students that they have to service as well. So just keep in mind that they're also human. They're going through this process. The human aspect of it is very real, and they have their struggles as well. So just keep that in mind. Next thing that I'm going to talk about is just review your child's paperwork. Make sure you're 100% in the know of what's on your child's IEP, or in circumstances, if your child has a 504 plan, make sure that you're well versed in what's in those plans. But I'm going to talk specifically about IEPs, because I feel like most of the audience here, their children probably have an IEP given the circumstances. And really just the most important thing that you need to be aware of on the IEP right now is going to be accommodations and obviously related services and schedule of services. So with accommodations, that's how what the school has agreed to implement to enable your child to make significant gains in their education, using those either strategies in the virtual classroom, modifications, etc., that meet your child's needs. Make sure you know exactly what those mean. Make sure you know how they're applied, in which situations are they applied, and whether or not the school is following through in applying the accommodations through distance learning. Being that your child is we're talking distance learning particularly, you have the ability to see in real time whether or not the special education teacher or the general ed teacher or whoever's working with your child is implementing those accommodations, right? You can see it in real time. It's almost like Big Brother's watching. You can see if they're doing this or not. And what I recommend is that you take note and collect data on what you're seeing. And you can take video. There's not a set way on how you can collect data. And that's the beautiful part of data collection, is you can collect and kind of take note on where your child is struggling, and accommodation specific, whether or not the school is implementing those accommodations or not that are listed in your child's IEP. So very important. If there's something that you see that's not working, that's listed, take note of that. If there's something that you're implementing as the parent, take note of that as well, that maybe it's not on the list, but it's working for you at home. Take note of that and ask that they include that in the official paperwork, so that then the school is responsible for implementing those specific accommodations. Because as you may or may not know, that document's a legal document. If they're not following the IEP faithfully, they're out of compliance. And when it comes to accommodations, it's very important that we're weeding out things that the child's not using, and we're including what the child needs to be successful. Because again, when it comes to accommodations, it's not a buffet. And sometimes schools kind of take that approach that, well, we have this whole list of accommodations and we can kind of pick and choose. Well, what happens is when you have a very long list of accommodations, a lot of those accommodations aren't being used. And so when a general education teacher or special education teacher sees a huge list of accommodations, they're really not going to bother with implementing each one. They're kind of going to pick and choose, and your child might not be getting what works for him or her. So it's very important that you shorten that list and make it as effective as possible, and then hold the school accountable for implementing those accommodations. And really, you can think outside the box. I'll give a brief kind of story on the importance of accommodations. But when I was a teacher, my very first year of teaching after I got certified, I was a general education teacher, and I was placed into a classroom. Not a whole lot of IEPs. There was a lot of 504s, but I did have some IEPs that I did not read because nobody told me I had to read them. And so literally my first day of teaching on the job, a kid raises his hand and he says, "Mister, I'm hungry. Give me my snack." And I said, "Hey, little Timmy, let's chill out. Like, I don't have snack. You got to wait till lunch." About 5 minutes go by and he's visibly more angry. And he says, "Yo, mister, I'm hungry. Where's my snack?" And I said, "Look, Timmy, you can wait till lunch and you can eat then. I don't have a snack." About 10 minutes go by. He gets up, flips over his desk, and runs out of the classroom. I don't know why. So I'm kind of freaking out. I text an administrator and I say, "Look, little Timmy ran out of the classroom. I don't know what's wrong. He kept asking for snack." So I went up through my day. I didn't understand why. And then I was, during my grading period, I was sitting down kind of, going over documents. And the administrator walks in and she had asked me if I had read little Timmy's IEP. And obviously I had not. Well, in his IEP, it was stated that he needed to eat a snack during my period specifically because it was before lunch, but he needed to eat a snack because his anxiety was linked to hunger because he had lived in his car as a homeless child with his family for several years. And so he had developed PTSD related to going hungry. So eating that snack allowed his anxiety levels to lower and therefore allowed him to learn. Well, I didn't read that information, partly my fault, but it just, I offer that story to you because it paints a picture on why accommodations are important, one, and two, it really allows you to think about accommodations in a different perspective or thinking outside the box, how accommodations can help your child. So in that instance, goldfish were allowed and listed on the IEP as a snack of minimal nutritional value for the child in order for that child to learn. And so again, with accommodations, let's be as specific as possible. Let's think of things that work outside the box, especially during distance learning, implementing those, because even as something as simple as a frequent snack can really go a long way. So I hope that gives you some insight. As well as reviewing on the IEP, I want to talk specifically about related services. So if your child before the pandemic, or even April, May, as we were going into the summer, was receiving speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, and they were transitioning over to what you would call telehealth services or distance learning for therapy. Well, before the pandemic, let's think of our mindsets of what our children were receiving during that time prior to the pandemic. If your child was receiving occupational therapy or physical therapy, think about the assistive technology that was afforded to your child or your child was able to use in school, and make sure that those types of accommodations and services are still being provided through distance learning. So I know that it's not optimal, and again, I'll talk about this here in a little bit, but with distance learning, nothing really changes in terms of what's outlined in the IEP in terms of minutes, so duration and frequency of the services, and also the assistive technology that's afforded to your child. So if your child is given a slant board, for instance, for occupational therapy, that needs to come from the school. You don't need to go out and buy something like that. Specifically, thinking of mobility devices, if your child had a mobility device in school and that was afforded to him or her, that needs to be afforded to him or her outside of school as well through distance learning because it's outlined in the IEP. And again, nothing changes outside of the delivery method of the instruction. So being well versed in what types of related services, so again, the types of therapies and also what types of assistive technology, thinking again, more of in terms of mobility devices, occupational therapy, manipulatives, things of that nature. Ask if it's outlined in the IEP, or if your child was receiving that prior to the pandemic, and then because of the pandemic and distance learning, they just stopped providing those accommodations or services, or in this case, assistive technologies. You need to ask for those, okay? And if the school makes a big stink and says we're not giving those because of distance learning, you can call myself or Hiraso. You can reach out to Brighton, we'll help you fight for those services, because by law, your children are entitled to those services, accommodations, and technologies that were deemed necessary for your children to make significant progress in their academics, okay? So super important. As well in the IEP, I've been kind of talking about first accommodations, related services, et cetera, et cetera. Be well versed in just everything in the language of the IEP when it comes specific to goals, because the goals shouldn't change just because your child might be receiving distance learning. Again, make sure that those goals are realistic. We have an acronym and I'm sure you guys have heard it before, but SMART, right? We want SMART goals. They're specific, they're measurable, right? They have action words, so actionable. They are realistic, right? And then they're linked to time. So there's a time frame. It's not like, 8 years from now, little Susie's going to be able to, meet her reading comprehension goal. No, it should be within an IEP year or 36 instructional weeks or whatever. It has to be specific. Make sure that you're reading over that documentation, making sure that it aligns with the instruction that your children are receiving. Because again, the only thing that's changed during this pandemic is the method of instruction, meaning your child's now learning through a computer. But the quality of that instruction, the accommodations, the services, the technologies afforded to your children, that should not have changed at all. And if they have, then again, please reach out to Brighton Center and we can set you up with a consultation and we can go over that with you. But again, very, very important that you're using the law to leverage against the school to really get the services and accommodations, the education, the free and appropriate public education that your children are entitled to based on their specific need. Don't let the distance learning deter you from that. And what's not funny, but what's interesting about distance learning is because it's distanced, we don't find ourselves often on campus. And so with that, we kind of also create this distance between us and the school. So it's very important that we don't allow that to be our reality. Have your finger on the pulse. Email your son or daughter's special education team constantly. Ask those questions. If something's not working, call for an ARD meeting. And that's really a good segue into what I'm going to be talking about. If you're having issues with distance learning, the very first piece of advice I'm going to ask of you is to go ahead and call for an ARD meeting, an ARD meeting. And the reason why, and not just like a parent-teacher conference or let me call the teacher, is because an ARD meeting is a legal meeting. By law, these meetings need to be recorded. Anything that's discussed in this meeting, everything should be recorded in the documentation in the IEP under the deliberations. In conjunction with that, you can always record. So you can always take in your smartphone or a recorder and you can let the ARD committee know that you're going to be recording this meeting. Now, why I bring that up is because a lot of times schools, they'll promise you the world in an ARD meeting and then there's no follow through. And then you go home and you read through the deliberations and they didn't note anything that you guys talked about, or they left out some things. Well, by law, they no longer have to read out the deliberations during meetings. So it's important that you're asking the committee to do so, because you want to make sure that before you leave that meeting, that everything you discussed is outlined and detailed in those deliberations, because otherwise they're going to leave it out. Well, if they do leave it out, and if you're recording, at least you have this, this is your safety net. So this is kind of what, as advocates, Hiraso and I always take a recorder to our ARD meetings, or if we're doing them over Zoom, we just let the committee know, hey, we will be recording. And the reason why we let them know is because if we don't let them know, then if this goes to, this goes to litigation, or you want to use something in court, you have to let them know that you're recording. Otherwise, it'll be dismissed in court. So that's the only reason why. But again, asking for an ARD is going to be key in making sure that you're setting up your child for success. One, because it is a legal meeting, and two, changes to the IEP really should happen only in an ARD meeting. Sometimes a school can make a minor change, like adding an accommodation where they can send an amendment home and you can just sign off of it. The school can sign off of it, easy peasy, right? But if you're talking about changing any type of service, duration, frequency of services, adding assistive technology, you really want to have an ARD meeting so that everything's documented. You are, you know, they call it, what is it, CYA or CYB, you know, covering your blank, making sure you have your ducks in a row and making sure that you're covering yourself down the road in case the school doesn't follow through and they don't give, you know, your children what they're entitled to based off FAPE, right? Again, free and appropriate public education. In these ARD meetings, you can go over your options. What are my options for distance learning? What is possible? What is not? And within that scope of options, I really want you parents to really think about distance learning as you know, what's the alternative? If your child does not have a health condition that's going to prohibit them from being at school or put them in that category of being susceptible to getting sick with this virus, or if there's no immediate health concern at home, I would really want you guys to have the conversation about possibly sending your children back to school. And I know that it's a scary and unsettling thing to discuss because for 8 months we've been conditioned to stay at home, but there really is no substitute for in-person learning. I've talked to a lot of families where, you know, there is no major health concerns at home. Yeah, the risk of getting sick is always there. It's low. The more this pandemic goes on, we know that children are not affected as much. So again, you really have to look at your situation specifically, but it's worth having that conversation because there really is no substitute for in-person learning. And when you sit out and do a pro and cons list on the pros and cons of sending your children back into school setting in person, I think that you'll find a lot of surprises. And for me, the biggest one is that if your child, again, doesn't have an immediate health concern or not at home, you guys aren't in that susceptible population. Excuse me. There is something to be said about you know, the emotional well-being, the mental well-being of your children, and for yourself as well as a parent. A lot of times, you know, if we're thinking of this pandemic extending and your child has already been out of the school setting since last March, you know, we're approaching 7-8 months into this. If you're going to go another 6 months of your child being at home, you really start thinking about the social aspect. How is this detrimental to my child's not only academics, but mental health, emotional, you know, are we adding more to the plate? Meaning, is my child developing any type of anxiety or depression from staying at home? We don't want to put our children in a situation where we're adding more to the plate instead of, you know, taking some off. And again, I'm not advocating one way or the other, and I don't think there is a best practice, but I am an advocate for looking at things objectively and looking at your situation specifically and saying, you know what, I've done the homework, I've done the math, and really the pros outweigh the cons in sending my child back, or there's just no way we can do that. We'll continue with distance learning, and that's completely fine. But again, I like to see both sides, and I like to present that information to you because I think there's a lot of guilt and a lot of obviously worry about sending our children back. And I think that that's healthy to be worried and to be concerned and to feel guilt. And it's okay, but you need to have these conversations and see what's best for your child. Last thing I really want to talk about in terms of distance learning, obviously calling for this art is just, and I mentioned it briefly earlier, but it is really taking data, right? Collecting data, seeing what your children are doing, seeing if they're regressing, seeing if things are getting worse, or if this situation with distance learning has actually been kind of a blessing in disguise and your child is flourishing. Either way, I think that taking data, and again, there's no right or wrong way, but maybe just documenting, you can write down how your child is doing, what works in terms of accommodations, what things are working, what things are not working, what could work. Anything that you can document, or if the school is saying, you know what, Timmy and Jimmy and Susie, they're doing fantastic, they're knocking it out of the park, but at home you're seeing that they're struggling, write that down. Take video of them struggling. you really want to paint as clear and simple of a picture and honest of a picture of where your child's abilities are, so that the art committee then, you guys can come up with solutions to best serve your children. And really with the data collection, there's no right or wrong way. Just document what you're seeing, start journaling in real time, so that next time you call for that art meeting, you're not going to a gunfight with a knife, right? That you're bringing that ammunition, you're telling them, look, this is what I'm seeing. This is my data. This is what I'm living every day. And I, as the parent, as the loudest member of that committee, I'm going to advocate for my child, and I'm going to ask that the school consider giving my child ABC, right? At least you're bringing solutions to the table. You're bringing actual factual data of where your child is at, whether it be written, a video, it doesn't matter. And you're prepared. And I think you will find that the school will be more willing to meet you halfway if you are prepared and you're bringing solutions to the table instead of just complaints. And that's just the reality of the situation. As much as we are mama and papa bears and we want to go in there and yell and scream and fight for our children, we have to do it in a way that's going to, one, be an amicable process, because you don't want to burn those bridges. These people have to work with your family. They have to work with your children specifically. We don't want to, we don't want to deteriorate that relationship. So be prepared. Come with solutions. You will find that you're really helping the teachers out by coming with solutions and being honest and painting that clear picture of where your child is at. Because a lot of times these teachers spend very little time with our kids, especially during special education. If your child's only getting inclusion services like a pull in or pull out, but they're in the general education setting, those teachers who are giving that specialized instruction spend very little time with our children. So just letting them know, hey, this is what's happening. This is what's going on. If you're coming to prepare to an ARD with data and solutions, you will find that more often than not, the school will see it your way, and you'll be afforded more than really what you think you can get. So, but that's really my side of the story in terms of distance learning. Again, just to recap, be prepared to be responsible for a lot of the heavy lifting. This is a time where we have to really dig deep and pick up the slack a little bit, especially with distance learning. It's not the best solution, but we also have to become the teacher. Reviewing what's on your child's IEP, please become acquainted with that. Know what's on there, know what's not on there, and know what might be missing. Setting up your child's environment for success, making sure that your child's at-home environment is set up for their success. Children, home is a place where they like to unwind. They know that home is where they can play with their toys, where they can be children, where they can relax. Well, now it's become school and home. So we want to make sure that we are designating areas for learning and designating areas for playing. And then just determining if distance learning is the best option for you. If possible, have the conversation about going back to school. And then obviously the last thing I talked about is calling for an ARD meeting if you're unsure or you want to have anything changed or added to your child's IEP. Please call for an ARD and be prepared with data. So that's my end for distance learning. I'd be happy to answer any questions. If you have any quick questions about distance learning, I can answer one or two. And then I really want to hand the mic to Girasol, because she has some really great information about IEPs and in particular. All right. So if no questions, Girasol, if you're ready, I'll go ahead and pass on to you.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be able to provide information for you guys today. I agree with all the information. Thank you so much, Alex, for all the wonderful tips and, back preparing our minds to get back into what do we have to do to provide reasons and data to support the needs that we have and that maybe we are able to see and they're not seeing when they're in school. But my part is we're going to talk about the IEP components. Just to give you a little bit of background, I am a special education advocate and trainer for Brighton Center, and I've been at Brighton for 13 years. I am a parent of a couple of kids that are in special education services who are receiving these services for a variety of reasons. So I've had a little bit of the parent frustration and the parent emotional, processing information where it's a lot, and kind of had to lead my way into being prepared and knowing exactly how to ask for these things. So the IEP components that we're going to talk about is just to give you, I'm sure you've already gone to ARDS, you've already had the breakthrough of what does all this information mean, what does special education mean, and all the acronyms that you kind of have to learn a new language, right? But we start off with the IEP with the PLAFs, and what we call PLAFs are the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, meaning that all of these things that your child can do, yes, no, weaknesses, strengths, all the wonderful things he can do at school, the ones that he can do at home, and really, we kind of get a little frustrated and we want to know a little bit more of, this should paint a picture of your child as a whole. It should give me information that if I haven't had the pleasure to meet your child, it should have enough information for me to know, oh, she probably likes math. She probably likes this or that. And this is how, she engages in that activity or subject. This is her preference. This is where she's at. We want to know a lot from that. And the reason why we want to stress this so much is because this is pretty much what's going to give the special education teacher and everybody in that committee the view that they're not able to see on a daily basis if they haven't met your child. And it's going to guide the entire IEP. So all of the goals, all of the services that your child is going to be receiving, it's going to be based on the PLAFs. So we want to make sure that parents are asking for lengthy PLAFs. I want to know more. I don't want to know just, oh, she's doing great in reading. No, I want to know exactly how she's doing. What level is she in? Where should she be? What are her strengths? What are her weaknesses? So if we go into the PLAFs, we want to make sure that all of the academic areas are on there. We want to know all of the non-academic, all of the PE, all of the, related, not services, but the music, how is she doing in art? How is she doing in all these other areas? Because we want to know how my child's disability affects her in all of her day, not just one or the other. So when we talk about the PLAFs, we want to know all of the strengths and we want to know all of the weaknesses. When we see these weaknesses, as parents, we're able to even provide additional information. Maybe they're doing something at school that they don't do at home or vice versa. So we can kind of contribute to those PLAFs being a little bit more detailed. When they are detailed in those areas of weaknesses, then it gives us a lot to work with. And how are we wanting to work in closing that gap that our student may have compared to other students in the same grade level or compared to other students their same age. So we want to make sure that that gap is getting smaller, but we need to be able to target that. So it can be an academic goal, or it can be a behavioral. It can also be some kind of an adaptive skill that we're trying to teach. So with that in mind, this is what's going to be the most important that we kind of stress out and make sure that when we are receiving or when we are scheduling an IEP, an ARD meeting, we are receiving an IEP draft with updated PLAFs. So that's one of the things that I always recommend my families. If you're going to have an ARD meeting and you're calling me so that I can attend with you, I want you to have a little bit of homework. I want you to go to the school, to email the school and let them know, can I please have the IEP draft? Can I also have the updated PLAFs? Because that gives the parent that opportunity to read what are they going to be proposing. It also gives us, where's my student at so far? So if we agree or disagree, it gives us some time to say, hey, I need a little bit more information on reading. I need a little bit more information on math. How is, maybe they're saying that it's great, everything is fun, but then we have emails and emails of the math teacher letting us know how assignments have not been turned in, or there's some behaviors during math class. So we want to kind of make sure that we are taking our data as well and present our updated, present levels in a way that they get included in this area. Once they're included in the PLAFs, then it'll be documented. It'll be, part of binding document, a legal document. So the PLOPS is something that we want to make sure you are stressing. I don't want to say that teachers are not doing, the best job that they possibly can. Maybe they are, and they know your student and they're working wonderful, but when that student moves on to the next grade, the next teacher is not going to know all of this information. And by us doing this, it will give them a little bit more information of what they're working with and how to support your child. So after that, we have, the goals. So how do we come up with goals? How do teachers come up with goals out of nowhere? Who gives them that guidance? Unfortunately, we do have a lot of staff members who share that they didn't get training to how to develop goals. We don't see a lot of, education background and training background on how to develop proper goals. We like to make sure that our goals are, two kind of golden rules is that they have to be observable and they have to be measurable. And when we say observable is anybody from, an outside window, if we were peeking in the classroom, we know exactly what we're looking for. We know exactly what the child is supposed to be doing. And we're able to say, is that child doing this? Yes or no? And that's it. And that it's measurable. Can we measure? Yes, she did it. No, she didn't. So that we have data to show progress, because we want to make sure that, we remind parents that although we may have a student who is disability may be a little bit more severe than others, school is not a daycare. School is school, and our kids have the educational right to learn just like everybody else. So we want to make sure that goals are measurable, they are observable, and that where do we come up with these goals? Well, the first thing that we see and that teachers see is the TEKS, the Texas Essential Skills Knowledge, which is pretty much giving the guidance and the general education curriculum to everybody, right? If your child did not have a disability, this is what your child would be learning. In first grade, they're learning their ABCs, they're counting to 100, counting to 1,000, all of these things is for everyone. But if we go back to the PLOPs and we see, well, for this specific grading, for this grade, the student is supposed to learn to count to 100, and my child's weaknesses in the area of math is that she can only count to 20. Well, then that gives us that goal that we can work on. We're going to work on the goal and trying to close that gap. So that'll give us, well, where is she at? We'll go back to the PLOPs and saying, okay, well, if she can only count to 20, that's her baseline. How many times have we seen her, when we're working with her, how far can she go? Can she at least rote count? Can she identify them? Can she copy them? We go into depth into those conversations of, is it worth the goal? Do we want to challenge her? Do we want her to count to 100? Do we want to bring it just to 50? Do we, how long did it take her to get to learn those 20 numbers? So all of that information should be included in the PLOP so that it gives us great information to know how to plan that goal. Goals are things that, that we should be working for a whole year. So we don't want to have a goal if she can count to 20 for her to count to 25, because we are not going to spend a whole year, learning 5 numbers. We want to make sure that we are kind of viewing this as by next year, next year, she's going to be able to do what? He's going to be able to do what? So with that in mind, goals are going to be, guided from those weaknesses, areas of need that we saw in the PLOPs. One of the things that we get asked a lot is, how many goals is too much? How many goals is too little? It goes and it varies depending on your student. We don't want to have 20, 25 goals, because obviously that's a lot of things to work with. But if they are needed, what is it that we need? Let's go into each subject and make sure that we are targeting things that need to be worked on, that are crucial for us to close the gap so that your child can continue making that progress. Another thing that we want to make sure with the goals is that they don't have to be all academic. They can be, but there's also adaptive skills that our kids need to be learning. There's also some behaviorals. And again, behaviors don't always have to be aggression. They don't have to be, something that we see our kids get in trouble and they're breaking things, or they're saying bad words, things like that. But there's also some internal behaviors where I'm not going to work, I'm going to shut down, or I'm going to be distracted, or I'm going to ask to go to the restroom every time that it's reading time because I don't like to read. You know, those kind of things are also things that we kind of have to consider. For girls, the majority of the girls they kind of fall through the cracks because they really don't have a lot of behaviors. If they're bored, if they don't understand something, they just kind of stay quiet and just wait until they seem like they're understanding, but they're not. So we kind of have to make sure that that's also a behavior goal that is being targeted if we do see something like that. Boys tend to, if they get bored and if they're not understanding the concepts, then they start playing around, or they start, you know, talking or going under the desk, and there's a lot of, you know, disruption. So it's easy for boys to kind of get targeted as to we need a behavior goal for this kid. So with that in mind, it's just, what is it that we get to see prior to that ARD meeting when we do ask for that IEP draft, when we do see those present levels? And if you feel that, well, I see all of these things are being proposed, I know she can do this already, I know he can do this already, I need it to be higher, I need the expectation, I need to challenge my child. That's all you got to say, and voice your concern. You can also say, I don't see the value in this. I would like to see something a little bit different. I don't know why. Yes, it is part of the TEAC. And because it is part of the TEAC, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to teach your child exactly what the gen ed students are learning, because the true fact is that they are also having access to the general education curriculum. So why the difference between the goal and that target TEAC, why don't we just have the same, is because they still have access to it. The only difference is that for this specific goal, we're going to be taking data. We are going to take data and we're going to prove to the parent that we are teaching the skill throughout the entire year. And we're going to be providing that information as to how the child is progressing. So we want to make sure that those goals, it's not just about, we're going to learn the month, you know, of May and that's it. No, we want to learn the whole calendar. You know, we don't want to just teach addition. We're going to teach a little bit of each, you know, so just kind of focus on what is the role of the goal? What is the skill that we're trying to teach? Another thing that we see a lot in goals is that they can be stacked. They can have a lot of things that are being worked within the same goal. So I want my, you know, from annual to annual, the student is going to be learning addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, you know, with 25% accuracy, you know, out of 7 out of 8 trials. So when we see something like that, when we see an IEP draft that comes to us like that, then the first things that we ask is the parent, how is your child doing in math? Can your child do, you know, all of these things? Well, he's, you know, he or she is really good in addition, but not in subtraction. Or yes, but we haven't gotten to multiplication. Or we, you know, so if we were to get a response now and you say that your child is meeting 35% of this goal, what would that mean? Would you be able to understand the percentage within each, you know, skill, the addition, the subtraction, the multiplication, or would it be a combination of all of them? So does that mean that 5% in each? Does that mean that it's, you know, 10% in addition, but 20, you know, it varies so much. So we want to make sure that if we're writing a goal and that we're accepting a goal, it's so easy to understand. Well, then let's just make it addition. And if we need to have one goal for each skill, then that's something we can do. Or if we need to break it down into benchmarks, then that's something we can do. Because we want to make sure that it's also easy for the staff to take data to be able to prove to you that there is some progress or that there is no progress, so that we can target the skill in a different manner. So observable, measurable, yes, challenging, because we do have high standards for our kids, not because they have a disability means that they're not capable of learning. So we do want to challenge them. And we want to make sure that there's that data collection portion that is being shared with the family. So when we talk about goals and the number of goals, we are targeting the weaknesses from the PLAFs. that become goals. And that's why in the PLAFs, we also have the behavior, we also have the adaptive skills. So it kind of goes with the flow, right? We have the PLAFs and that becomes goals. But when we put goals, then we are asking, okay, well, how are we going to know that they're following these goals? How are we going to know that my child is learning this? How am I going to know? So there is a lot of, questions from the families asking, how do I know? I don't go to school with her until now, right? Now we're actually going to school with them. With distance learning, we're kind of right next to the computer and seeing how they're learning. So in a way, it's kind of like a blessing for us to be able to finally see how is it that the information is presented to my child, and how is it that I can support her or him and see if it's working, or maybe I can suggest something. So it goes from the PLAFs to the goals. And now that we have the goals, we talk about how are we going to measure them. So teachers are going to, suggest either observations. Why I can see she can do it. I can see her. She gives me her work completion. That's another method. Teachers can make tests and kind of test the concept and see if, okay, she understands this concept. Let's move on to the next one. Yes. Behavior contracts. If your child is having behavior weaknesses and behavior issues, and they're being sent to the administration, and they're getting tickets or whatever, however it is that they're documenting, that's also a method of documentation. But there's also that one single word that says the data collection sheets. Data collection is what we always request, and we always tell families to have data collection in every single goal, because that means that every time that they're data on your child that they're measuring, they're able to provide parents, this is a day when we measured math. This is a day where we measured writing. This is a day. So there's dates. It's very clear. It's just a yes or no if they were able to complete that task or that demand, follow the instructions. And that gives us a very clear percentage of whether that was met or not. Because there is grading periods, it kind of also gives you a little bit of an understanding of where should my child be. If we're in the first grading period, second, third, or fourth, if our goal is that, let's just say we are asking 100%, which is not very realistic, but let's just say we're asking for 100% of that goal, then I'm expecting 25% by the first grading period, 50 by the second, 75 by the third, and 100 at the end of the year. So like that, we know that my child met their goal. If we are in the beginning of the grading period and we say, hey, we're at 5 or 10%, yes, we are making progress, but it's very minimal, then it's time for us to kind of think about it, have those conversations with the art committee and say, hey, do we need to reconsider? Is this goal too high? Do we want to give it a little bit of more time? Do we need to change the way that it's being taught? Do we need to, change something because it's obviously very, very minimal? Or are we wanting to give more supports in order for that to move along the progress a little bit better? So it provides us with that measuring, component that we're always asking for, because that's really, what we want to know. How will we know if your daughter or your son is getting better in math? If we just say, well, he's learning, he's doing good, and we get, notes that they're doing awesome and they're doing great, but how do we know? We need something concrete. We need to know, well, this is how we measured it. We made a test. We counted all the assignments, and out of these assignments and out of these tests and out of these, benchmarks, we've met, 70% or 80% accuracy. So that gives us that peace of mind that, yes, my child is actually learning in school. After the measuring component, we also go into related services. And with related services is we already have the PLAFs, and it sounds, a little bit repetitive, but we have the PLAFs of where we started. We created goals. We know how we're going to measure them. But then we go into how are we going to support this student with related services. And related services are going to be anybody that is an occupational therapist, a visually impaired teacher for the blind? Is it going to be a physical therapist? Is it going to be an orientation and movement? How are we going to give this child that support to continue meeting these goals? If there is a physical component, if there is an attention component, if there is something else that needs to be serviced to kind of level that playing field for them. So it's not just saying, well, let's have the special education teacher provide these. There's a very specific, license for each area that we want to make sure that our student is getting the support from. It's not the same that the teacher, and of course there's teachers who are very experienced because of the years that they have been teaching and have plenty of methods that they are willing to introduce to our children. However, there is that related service that comes with a license with a very designed, training to support the area of their specialty. So, and the other part is that there is a time for their service. There is a frequency of service. How often do we need to see an OT or PT or, any other related services? How often do we need it? Do we just need them, to be able to provide the service? Do we need them to just consult with the staff and kind of provide some information and some background to how we can kind of support the student? There's that beginning, it starts, the IEP, or it starts in the middle. It's, how long is this service going to be? And then what is the location of the service? Is it going to be inside of the gen ed classroom? Is it going to be in a pull-out service, outside? Is it, if it's O&M, well, then it's going to be around the campus. Is it going to be off campus? All of these things are something that related services will provide information on. Then we go into the frequency of the reporting of the progress. And when we talk about this, we talk about, yes, we do receive report cards every, at the end of every grading period, which gives us, a little bit of, well, your child has 90, 80, 75, S for, or E for excellent, or S for satisfactory. And does that give us information of the progress that they're making? Yes and no. So general education is going to cover those grading report cards, but we also want to know, how is my child doing in the IEP goals that we as a committee decided, and is he moving or is she moving and that making those progress to that goal? So when do we get these notes? When do we get these progress reports? We get them at the same time that the report cards go home. Usually you will get them by mail because they do have to be certified. They have to, schools do have to have documentation where they are providing this because legally they have to. Sometimes you get them by email. Sometimes you'll get them in the backpack. We just care that you get them, and not that you get them and you just put them like, oh, okay, well, I got it. Everything looks good. And you put them away in our, huge binder where we have all the IEP paperwork. It's important that we open them and we read them and we understand them and we know exactly, we ask questions. What does that mean? And is this the same that, is she doing the same? Is there progress? We want to make sure that parents, know exactly how, this progress is being made. Because we participated in the IEP program, or planning when you were in the ARD, because we participated and we know what that looks like, we ask questions about how that goal was going to be presented to our child, then we're able to kind of do a mini test at home and say, okay, well, if she can do, if she can count to 20, and we already knew she could count to 20, and the goal was she was going to count to 80, and we're seeing 20%, well, let me test her. I know exactly how they do it. So we can be able to perform that at home. It could say out of, a series of 3, 3 little options that we give them. What number is that? Or what comes after this? All these things that we are able to provide and ask because we know that the teacher, and when we were in that art meeting, we asked those questions of how would that look like for my child? And I like to, go back a little bit. My son is now 20 years old, but when he started PPCD at age 3, goals didn't make a lot of sense to me. I just was happy that he was in school. I was happy that they were going to teach him something, but I wanted to know more. how were they going to get my little 3-year-old who was running around everywhere, who didn't pay attention, who couldn't talk, to learn, these goals in their heads? It made sense, but in mine it didn't. So I asked lots of questions. So the first thing that one of his first goals was that he was going to be able to identify his name. And for me, it was like, okay, well, how are we going to do this? And I give this example just so that you can kind of modify this goal into your own child for whatever the reason, whatever it is that your child is trying to learn. When they told me that he was going to learn his name, I said, okay, well, how are you going to do that? Well, we're going to fill up the classroom with areas that have his name. And I was like, okay, well, his chair will have his name. The area where he sits at circle time will have his name. His cubby will have his name. And in my mind, I'm still thinking, okay, well, that still it's not sufficient. How is he even going to know that that's his name? He doesn't know how to read. He doesn't, he's just starting to recognize that that's his name. So they did ask me, what his favorite color was, what the cartoons that he liked, and also as a parent to kind of think back, if we have a child who is, does not communicate verbally, that's also kind of something that, brought me back a little bit because he couldn't talk, I didn't give him many options. So like that gave me a little bit of, oh, well, let me start asking, let me start showing him and see if he does have a preference. I don't usually, because I know he can't talk, I don't ask him things. I'm just kind of like, okay, well, I like blue or I like red. So that's what you're getting. I like this shirt. So that's what you're getting. So it gave me a little bit of, let me start asking questions. His name is Ricardo. Ricardo, which one do you want? And although in the beginning he didn't really have a preference, eventually I learned he did. So with that, he started with his name. His color was blue. The name was blue. He liked a little Zaboomafoo monkey that he used to watch, and they made the little monkey, a little part of the letters or something, and they would show him that. And
so sad.
I'm sorry. I was a little bit of, confused with, hey, how are we going to, how is he going to be able to identify his name? So his favorite snack was Pringles. So every time they would show him his name, and he would touch his name, they would give him a little chip. Every time he sat in the right place, here, Ricardo, sit here, he would get a chip. Every time that, things like that happen, he stood in line and they would make him touch his name. He got a little chip. Eventually he got really quick about, kids love to work for food, especially if it's junk food. So he got really good about, that's where I go. That's my name. That says Ricardo. And to me, I was like, well, I don't really understand does he know that that's his name, or he's just kind of like learning that I have to touch this and then I get a chip. So how is it that maybe he thinks it's a chip and not Ricardo? So I asked lots of questions like that. And eventually it got to the point where they would show him two names and he got to pick Ricardo and he would get his Pringle. And if he picked the other name, he wouldn't get anything. So he learned that one was his name. They added a third name and he started picking his own. They removed the color and he still picked his. They removed the monkey image and he still picked. So that's when we kind of understood, oh, he knows his name. Eventually they cut, they said, let's make him know how to spell his name. And I was like, oh my God, this took us a year. How are we going to do this? And I think it's thinking out of the box, right? I assumed immediately that if he has to spell his name, he has to write it with a pencil and he has to write it on a paper, or he has to do something like that so that we can measure if he knows how to spell it. But it wasn't that way. It was more of, he has his name in a paper, they cut it in half and all he had to do was put it the correct way. He could do that. Eventually they cut it into every single letter and he was able to put them together and he could do that, and until he got to tracing and, writing, and now he writes his name. But it was kind of the mentality of, it's going to be baby steps and this is how we're going to start. So that made sense for me. So when you are there in that ARD meeting, ask for how is it going to be presented? Ask, how does that look like? Because at the end of the day, you are your child's best expert. You are who knows exactly. You can already think about it and say, yes, my daughter could do that. My daughter, no, that's not going to work. I mean, I'm willing to try, but I don't see that working. And make those suggestions to how if they gave my son a sticker for every time he did something right, he wouldn't work. He doesn't like stickers. But I know what things he does work for. He wants to go outside. He wants to play on the computer. He wants to eat ice. You know, whatever it is that your child is going to be working for, we need to kind of voice that so that they are motivated and they are working and for that incentive in a way. Then we go into, you know, the opportunities for our children to also participate in extracurricular activities and non-academic activities. So not because they have an IEP means that, well, they can't do PE. Well, no, they can't do, you know, some of these activities that are not, you know, part of the curriculum, that it's after school or it's this or that. It's important that we know that they have and they should be able to have the same opportunities just like everyone else. One of the things that we see very often is, well, if my child rides a special education bus, then whenever they do field trips, my child is going to be alone in the special education bus and not have access to ride with my child's class and ride with them to the event where they're going. So we see this a lot, and we see where they make that exception and says, yes, this child is going to be transported through a special education bus from home to school and from school back to the house. But in the event that there is a field trip, this child is able to ride a general education bus because there will be staff on that bus. There will be an aide on that bus. So then it's providing that, you know, that activity that your child can participate with other students, even if it's just riding the bus to the zoo where they're going. So just like that, it applies in all areas where we want to make sure that we are considering, does your child have access to the non-academic activities that every other child in that school has in that campus. If there is that area where my child is not, you know, because of the special education bus, there's that justification portion where unless it's to a field trip or unless this and that, you know, you make those justifications documented in that IEP. Then we go into the schedule of services. So we've gone from the present levels, we've gone to, you know, from the strengths and weaknesses, we've made those weaknesses goals, we've decided how we're going to measure them, we've decided who's going to help us, you know, the related services is going to help our child meet those goals, and that we're going to be receiving, you know, report cards and progress reports at the end of every grading period. And then we talk about schedule. We talk about what is the day look for like my child. It's not just, well, the 7 to 3 schedule and that's what it is. It's each block. What does the schedule look like? We talk about how many minutes of that schedule. So if we have a reading block that lasts 90 minutes because it's English language arts, then if it's 90 minutes, well, how long of those 90 minutes is your child going to be supported through a special education teacher or the general education teacher, or, you know, and what does that look like? Majority of the time, and what we want to kind of see the majority of the time is we want to see a child in the general education classroom with same age peers and where he's going to be, you know, exercising those relationships and building those relationships with the students from his class. If for any reason that gets to impede his learning or the learning of others, then that's when we say, well, we need to, you know, to consider a little bit more of a restricted environment. But if not, we have to kind of choose that one first. We want to make sure that they're in that same classroom. We see a lot of collaborative classrooms where we have both the general education teacher and the special education teacher working together. Now they're not there together the entire time, but for the amount of minutes that your child is supposed to be receiving that support, then that teacher will be there. So it doesn't mean that the general education teacher is not going to be educating your child at all. That's also something that we see a lot, is that parents feel that, well, if she has or he has a reading goal, then gen ed really doesn't really educate my child because he has goals and that's all that they're working with. Well, no, they're still working with your child. They're still able to see that they're working in that classroom for the instruction time that may be 15, 20 minutes. Then they do independent work, and during that independent work, the special education teacher gets to work with them. Or they get pulled out, to a resource room, or there's some other kind of support provided during that time. So when we look at the minutes, we're going to see that schedule of services. We're going to see all of the subjects, and we're going to see the location. Where is my child? Is my child in general education classroom? Is my child in a special education classroom? Is my child both? Maybe it's half and half, or a little bit here and a little bit there. But it also, whoever is going to provide the majority of the minutes during that class, if not both, is going to be the staff member responsible for providing progress. So it can be where both of the staff members, gen ed and special education, are providing the progress, or if there's one who has a little bit more of minutes in that area, is going to be the one providing the progress. So when we see the schedule, we're going to see all of those areas, and we're going to see all of the minutes, and then we're going to see the areas of support down at the bottom, where we're going to see exactly the total amount of minutes that your child is going to be serviced with. This is not only for the academic, it's also for the, not academic, but the computer, art, music. It's also for the related services, speech, OT, PT, O&M, BI, all of the additional, related services. They also have a schedule, and they'll break it down for you, for in weeks and minutes, and either they're going to be pull-out services, they're going to be push-in, where they're going into the classroom to kind of help, or if they're going to be consult, where they're only going to be talking to the staff of how those services should look like and kind of monitor your child. So it's important that we know that the schedule of services and what does that look like. I have shared with my families a daily communication log that I used when my son was in school to kind of see what does that look like, because it's kind of difficult to know when, and this is before the pandemic, when are they receiving speech and OT and PT, and how did they do? I want to know, because when my son comes home, he may be just extra tired. He just does not seem himself. It wasn't a regular day, and it could have been because there was a related service that came to visit him that day, and he had speech and he worked really hard. So he came home and he was a little bit, more tired, or a little bit more irritable because he worked a little bit harder. So it's important that we have some kind of communication with a staff that, that comes home daily, so that we're able to see, did these related services also service him today? Is this, why he's a little bit cranky? Is this, well, it'll also give us information on, did he eat or did he not? And especially for kiddos who are nonverbal, who are not communicating verbally, and they have a little bit more of a struggle to let us know how their day went. We want to see that behaviors are communication, and yes, we see that my son gets home and he's tired and he's cranky and he's hitting his head or he's doing something. We also want to know why. It's not just, well, he had a bad day. He seemed good where, and it gives us a little bit of information that any other child would be able to communicate to their parent if they didn't have a disability, if they weren't able to communicate. So then we talk about, the meeting participants. When we talk about the ARD meetings, we want to know who's there and why. What is their role? First of all, we still have some parents who are saying, well, you can go ahead and have the meeting, just send me a copy of the IEP. Well, then when your child doesn't make progress, it's because they're trying to do their best, but they don't have the actual parent to provide some suggestions of what works at home. So we always say, you want to be there. You are the most important person. You are the voting member of that committee. So we need parents to be engaged. We need parents to be there for every single ARD meeting, and that no ARD meetings are being conducted without you. The administration person who is there could be a principal, could be a vice principal, or it could be a designee. Sometimes we have district representatives come in, or somebody else if for some reason the admin is off campus. but there is a role, and the role is that, you know, they are, in a way, they're there to budget. You know, they're giving a budget, and they're giving some funding to cover for these services. But we see that, you know, and coming also from a parent where, yeah, they're making minimal progress, but they're making progress, right? So that's not sufficient. We want to see what the art committee decided that the entire goal was going to be. And it's not that we're just wanting that minimal progress. We want that goal to be met. So if we were to have a speech therapy who would like to service our child 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, I'm sure that everybody on this conference would be like, yes, please, we will sign, tell me where to sign. Unfortunately, that's not, you know, how it works. And one of the roles from the administrator is to make sure that they are being serviced, but we're not giving them more than what they need just to make progress. So that's the reason why the administrator and the parent are the only two voting members from the art committee. Everybody else, we're just there to kind of make suggestions and, you know, help with the planning, but we are not voting members. Nobody else, even the staff that's there present. So we also have the general education teacher, and the role of the staff is that this would be your child's teacher if your child did not have a disability. If your child is not accessing special education classroom, that's great, but this is your child's teacher, gen ed teacher. We kind of see her as the inclusion person. If she or he is very involved in the ARD and knows about your child and knows everything about, you know, the planning, and it participates, then we know that your child has a very high possibility of engaging in that classroom and thriving, because this teacher is very knowledgeable and participates in the ARD meeting. The special education teacher is going to be the person who's in charge of the goals, of providing the documentation, ensuring that everybody's following all those accommodations and, you know, modifications from your child's IEP. It's kind of like what we kind of let families say or know. You're kind of co-parenting education with this case manager, if some are called, but it's a special education staff member. So case manager, SPED teacher, they are your co-parent with, you know, teaching your child. So if you have any questions, this is a person that you want to direct yourself to. We always recommend that you copy additional staff so that they, you know, there's plenty of people involved and that people are kind of keeping up with your concerns. But special education teacher and general education teacher should collaborate and should be able to provide, you know, the curriculum that the gen ed teacher is providing to your student, and then the special education teacher would be giving you, your student, all of those accommodations and working more specifically targeted to the areas of weaknesses and those goals. We have these four, you know, if we can say parent, admin, special education teacher, and general education teacher are the basic. We have to have them in every single art. It doesn't matter, you know, what kind of art it is. If it's an open art, if we are opening a re-evaluation, if we are closing, they have to be present. And we ask that when we say be present, they have to be present, they have to be involved, they have to be, you know, listening, suggesting. That's the expectation. They can't be on their phones, they can't be distracted, they can't be grading, you know, something else on the side or having a side conversation. We need them to be there to make decisions for our child, because we are deciding an entire educational year. Now, every other person, you know, aside from them four, could be a speech language pathologist. So if your child is receiving speech, then that also becomes part of the minimum, right? If your child is receiving an OT, well, then that person is now, you know, required to be there. VI, you know, which is now the teacher for the visually impaired. If we have orientation and movement, if we have physical therapists, anybody that is going to be needed. And I tell parents, if you have questions for someone, if you say, well, I'm going to have an art meeting, but they ask for the speech therapist to, not be present. If you have questions from speech, they need to be there. Or reschedule your meeting. If you have questions for, PE or adaptive PE, if you have questions for, sometimes we have the speech language pathologist be at the ARD meeting, but they're not the ones providing the service. It's actually an assistant. Request that the assistant be present so that you are able to make these questions and know, have them answer the questions for you. So everybody that is a participant in that meeting needs to be aware, available. They have to be prepared. They have to bring their data, and they have to, be engaged in the meeting. We see many, kind of on the side, not very involved. We see a lot of, well, I don't really, this is a child who's in special education. He doesn't come to my class, so I don't even really know him very much. So I'm just here, or sometimes a gen ed teacher that doesn't see your child from another, grade. We always want to have someone who's from your child's grade, and that if your child is going to be in a contained classroom, if we're looking at having your child attend a gen ed class for any reason, even if it's for a little bit of time, that teacher knows who this child is. They are giving that opportunity to come into my classroom. This is what we have, and make those suggestions too. With everything that you guys have mentioned, I think that, maybe for science, it's a hands-on, class. I think that they would be wonderful for 20 minutes. Maybe attend all of the specials with my classroom. So that's why we want to make sure that the general education is also a very, very, involved staff member, even if your child is in a contained classroom. Because at one point we want, the goal is for your child to be in a general education classroom with the rest of his peers or her peers. We want to, think about, long-term. And the reason why I say long-term is because my son is 20 years old. So I like to give parents, why do we want them to be, in gen ed if my child needs a lot of supports? Well, yes, as long as your child is learning, that's fine. But we want to make sure that they have the opportunity to build relationships from elementary to middle school, from middle school to high school. It's the same kiddos who they're going to school with. It's the same kids who in the beginning might not have seen your child and said, oh, well, that's different. My son used to wear a helmet when he was in PPCD. So he was, he did stand out a little bit, but eventually kids realized that, it was just a little boy with a helmet. And eventually it wasn't the little boy with a blue helmet. Eventually it got to stay, oh, that's Ricardo. That's the little boy that comes into my classroom. And he moved away from the label of the blue helmet to Ricardo. Actually he moved from the blue helmet to the little boy who ran away from class, and then from the running away from class to Ricardo, and getting to know him and saying hi to him. And so it is important for us to think of, how are we making sure that my kid is making those relationships or having opportunities to make those relationships? And then at the end, we talk about the indication of the agreement. Do we agree as the ARD, as a parent, do we agree to all of the decisions? Do we agree to the levels, the goals, how we're going to measure them, all of the related services that come into play with that, the frequency of when we're going to be receiving these progress reports? Do we agree to everything? Yes or no? You'll see that it's only the administrator and the parent who have to agree. One of the things that we want to make sure that is you don't have to agree right there and then. You can say, I would like to take my copy home and reread it and have it and, process, because it is a lot of information. Something that I like to share is I know everything that my son can do. And I know everything he cannot to do, believe me. And as hard as it is, I see it every day that I have to shower him, every day that I have to feed him, every day that I have to change him, I see it. But sometimes when they put it in writing, sometimes that emotion kicks in, and then I may lose, my objectivity, and I don't stick to what I want because I'm so, emotional about all of the other things that, I had forgotten a little bit, or I had it in the back of my head, and I was like, all right, I know he can't do those things. So we don't want to make decisions when we're emotional. Know yourself. So that's one of the things we like to to kind of recommend to families is know yourself, know that if you are going to be emotional, maybe it's not a good time for you to have an ARD meeting. It's going to take a lot from you. It may drain you a little bit or a lot. It does take prepping. You know, we tell families, do your homework, keep your data, you know, have your own agenda. That's something that we highly recommend. Have your own agenda, have your own concerns listed, prioritize, so that in the event that you're going through the meeting, you can kind of start checking off. We talked about this, I've talked about this. And if something doesn't get shared or discussed, bring it up and say, hey, I know that we've gone through most of the ARD, but this is something that we have not talked about, and I do have some concerns. Share your concerns. In the first page of your IEP, of your son's or daughter's IEP, is going to say parent concerns. And sometimes it just doesn't say anything. It's either C, deliberations, it says, you know, something very minimal. We want to make sure that that's not the case, that you are sharing your concerns on that first page so that every staff member who reads your child's IEP knows exactly where you're coming from. This mom is very concerned with reading. This mom is very concerned with, you know, math or relationships or social skills or, you know, access to, you know, using different parts of the campus or accessing the library, whatever that may be. We want to make sure that that's on the first page. Make sure that it's there, make sure that it's documented, because one of the greatest things about that IEP and about documentation is that once you document a concern, the school wants to document that they're addressing it, what is the response? So if I'm saying that I am concerned that my son has seizures, and, you know, he's been having seizures, and I'm just really concerned that he's going to have a seizure here, you know, and what that looks like, well, then their concern or their response is going to be that we're going to, you know, have an official training for all the staff to know exactly what the seizure plan says. We're going to document that if it's reading, well, then we're going to document that we are servicing this child with these reading interventions. These are the reading times. This is when they go with the reading specialist, you know, special education goal for reading. So it is very important that you have those concerns there, and that if you need to take time to read your document, that you take that time. Sometimes you feel pressured. Sometimes you may feel like, well, I have to sign, everybody's signing, everybody's looking at me. And there is, you know, sometimes we do have really big committees with a lot of people, but it is your right. And you can just say, you know, I'm not ready. Please, you know, go ahead and print it out for me. I will get back with you. You do have 5 days. Or you can table ARD and say, you know, let's come back in 10 days and reconvene and see where we're at. There's still some things that I don't agree with. I don't agree with the amount of speech therapy, or I don't agree with, you know, some of the goals. I need some more suggestions. I need some additional information, some additional data that I would like to review. So make your concerns known. What we do at Brighton is make sure, you know, that as advocates, we're not just there to support you, but we're also, you know, helping you find your voice, your advocate voice that you already have. It's just letting it come out. You know, how do you voice your concerns? How do you address them? If you have to, you know, do it by email, if you have to, you know, share, you know, have your own agenda and then share it with the ARD. That is something that we do also recommend, is if for some reason you have your own agenda, you have your own concerns, and you feel that, you know, it's not being documented the way that you're requesting it to be, attach it to the IEP. You can always have your own, you know, document and request that it is attached to your child's IEP and archived with it. So then that's something to kind of help you remember where were you at that point in time. So just agree or disagree. You make that choice, and then, you know, anything else, any other supplements that come along with that IEP, whether it's the autism supplement, an ESY for the extended school year, transportation, personal care services, behavior intervention plan. I mean, everything. There's so many, but whichever supplements your child has, that they are printed, and that you have a copy of every single one. So even if your IEP, you know, is 40, 50, 60 pages long, there's a plan, and that is what needs to be followed. So you can always go back and review it. You can always go back and kind of mark it and say, this is what I'm going to track. kind of have your little cheat sheets on it and say, this is where my daughter is at, or my son, and this is what I'm going to come back and reread it, 2 or 3 weeks after, and see if we're still on the same page. See if I see something different, share it with us and share your concerns so that we can see and verify, yes, these services are being provided. Yes, it's on here, or no, it doesn't mention it. Let's have an ARD meeting and make sure that we add it. So those are the components that we want to make sure that we kind of are a little bit more in tune with, that we know exactly. There's plenty more, there's plenty more to kind of go in depth. But with this in mind, this is what kind of like the meat is. This is what you want to be an expert in. This is what you want to focus. If you have concerns, these are the areas where you're going to look for those concerns, that they are documented. And then at the end, it's just knowing that this is a document that can always be changed. If for any reason there is something there that you agree or disagree, if you want to add or discontinue, it is a voluntary service. You can always decide that this is not what you want for your child and you don't want to receive special education services anymore. But it is a work in progress document. You can always go back, call another ARD meeting and have it changed. So don't think that once you sign, that's it. I'm never going to be able to change it. That's something that can obviously be changed at a bare minimum. One time a year is when you'll meet with a school. But if it's a parent requested ARD meeting, that you can have as many as you need to address your concerns. So at this point, that is it. If there's anybody who has questions on these areas, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question, or type it in the chat so that I can address it. But we'll talk a little bit, just really briefly, about a 504. If you have, I'm assuming that everybody that is on here already has an IEP. But if anybody who has not yet, gone through the evaluation process, we would start with having a section 504 for our kiddo, and going from there with the intention in mind to have the evaluation and have the supports that an IEP and the components that an IEP would provide, as a little bit more of a robust service. We want to make sure that it's not just, a 504. We feel more of access to the actual, environment, more of an access and accessibility of an educational right, rather than, a service itself. I see a question that we are starting the evaluation process with our 3rd grader. Okay, so is there a question that you have? I'm glad that you're starting the process. The evaluation process does take 45 school days from the time that you sign. So that's kind of like the clue. It takes 45 school days from the day that you sign the consent, when you give them permission. With the pandemic, it can vary a little bit with timelines, just because if we were to go back into quarantine and then not being able to provide the child for evaluation will be different. But if that school, that campus where your child is attending is actually receiving some in-person students and are in the stage of receiving students back into the campus, then there should be some scheduling for evaluations as well. And the person who should be doing the evaluation is the LSSP, which is the Licensed Specialist in School Psychology. And it is a team. You are part of a team. You'll be asked to answer lots of questions and rating scales, and as well as gen ed teachers. Okay. Alex, would you like to take the next question?
Yes. So the question is, can you explain 504 versus IEP? First of all, thank you, Hirasol, for sharing all of the information on IEPs. It's super important information, so thank you. Yeah, so biggest difference is, well, there's 2 sets of laws that govern 504 and IEP. So with 504, it started as a civil rights law in the 70s, and it's kind of morphed into what it is today, which is essentially it's a special education law that protects students who meet criteria for disability or any other impairment that is not listed as one of the 13 eligibilities in the state of Texas. So one of the examples that I like to give is, let's say your son or daughter breaks their leg and they need a mobility device to access their education. Well, they're not going to qualify for special education, so they would qualify for a 504 plan and have a 504 program or plan in place for your daughter or son to access that mobility device, and maybe some accommodations in the classroom, like, able to leave 5 minutes before the bell rings so they can, get out of the classroom on time and get to their next period. Things like that. It's very bare bones. The burden falls on the student to really advocate for him or herself. There's not any, outside of the 504 plan itself that outlines the accommodations, there's not going to be any goals on the 504 plan. You legally don't have to even have a 504 meeting yearly. It's really, really, really bare bones. And then really the biggest, I guess, difference in the two, outside of the laws that govern both, right? So 504 and with IEP, IDEA law governs everything that happens within special education. So if your son or daughter qualify, then their rights as well as your rights as parents will be protected under IDEA law. Under a 504 plan, it's under section 504, and it's a completely different beast altogether. You're not going to have, again, the accountability that you do with an IEP, the ARD meetings, which are legal meetings that need to happen at least once per year. As Hida Sol said, you can call one for any time. You really, there's nothing in law for 504 that says you have to have one every year, or that you have to, specific people need to be there. It's very, very, very bare bones. And if you're a family that's currently has a child on a 504 plan and just unsure about the process, I always err on the side of caution. I would always venture into possibly looking at special education, just because there are more protections in place. There are more accountability. There's more accountability when your son or daughter qualify for special education and have an IEP. There's just more law on your side. And then again, I keep talking about the accountability piece, but there's just more legality surrounding special education than there is for 504. And again, your son or daughter would only qualify for a 504 plan if he or she did not qualify for special education under one of the 13 criteria. Another area where you might see a child be on a 504 plan is if he or she has, let's say, ADHD, but their disability doesn't impact them academically as much to where they would warrant more interventions. They might place your child, on a 504 plan just to have extended time. And you really see this a lot with high school students. A lot of high school students just have a 504 plan for ADHD instead of an IEP because they just require, extra time on tests like that. So in a nutshell, really, it's going to come down to the accountability and the laws and protections that are afforded based on IDEA law versus 504, which again, you're going to have a more robust system and process in place for special education than you are going to have for 504. So what I would always recommend is to pursue the eligibility under the special education umbrella as opposed to 504.
Thank you so much, Alex. And we have another question. My daughter is going to have a read this year. Does she have to be on campus for this, or can she remain at home? So it all depends on, what is the read going to, what are your thoughts? The reevaluation, if it's due, because it's every 3 years, if all the academics, we're really going through some tough times right now with the kids not being in person, and, they will be able to do some assessments virtually. They will be able to, know and grade some of those academics, through what she's turning in and assignments. But if it's something that's going to require, a PT, an OT, something physical where, is she able to do this? It may be something that you can ask and have, through a virtual platform, or they may want to, be present. I have had a couple of families who have chosen to have the read, outside of their home. So they're being able to measure just a couple of these items, in person, but with taking the distance learning, not distance, the 6 feet apart and all of the required, quarantine precautions. So yes and no. So I want to make sure that, the read is the reevaluation of the existing data. So this is where it gets a little tricky when we want to make sure that we are also sharing data. You can give your documentation. It can be, if you want it to be in virtual, yes. If you want it to be in person, yes. It's going to be a little bit of both. So it can be just depending on your specific situation, and making sure that you voice, whatever concerns you have. If it's something because of health concerns that you don't want your student to participate in person, then let them know so that they can see how they can accommodate those evaluations that have to be in person, and if they're able to provide them in a virtual setting as well. Is there any other questions? We'll stay on a little bit. If anybody else has any other questions.
I have a question. How would people get a hold of you if they need your guidance?
Awesome. We will type it on the chat, but Brighton Center is a nonprofit organization. We have a website. You can access www.brightonsA.org, and you can call 210-826-4492. We have a wonderful administration person who takes all of our phone calls and assigns you, because we are in a way, they're the different advocates. We have different districts and different zip codes that we are actually servicing. She will kind of give you, answer the questions, let you know the registration process, let you know everything that you need to know to be able to access and schedule an appointment for a pre-ARD. We want to make sure that we are meeting with families. And right now, because of the pandemic, we are currently meeting virtually. So we will have a Zoom meeting with our family. We ask for the IEP, we'll ask for things in advance so that when we are meeting with them, we're able to share, and answer their questions and things like that. So it just, reach out to us. If you can email, access our website, we're more than happy. I know we get a lot of, parent referrals, a lot of parents that share and collaborate with each other, share our phone number, share our website, our emails, they're there so that we are able to be, in contact with anybody that needs support.
Great.
I have a quick question. This is
Yes.
not for me, but for a friend of mine. What would you recommend to a parent whose child has fallen behind and is now failing, but their IEP states that they're supposed to have extra time to complete their assignments, but the school isn't following that? Would you recommend them calling an ARD, or what would you recommend for them?
Yes, me and both Alex are like, yes. Yes, because we want to make sure not only that the recommendation of, kind of holding them accountable for my child needs extra time, but also documenting that they're not giving the time. Hey, this has happened. My child is failing, and it's due because of the failed accommodation. So now in a way you're in violation and you need to help me, get my student where they need to be, where these accommodations are being followed. So something that we would suggest at that time would be what teachers are using, what accommodations, what kind of asking and holding the school accountable to, how many assignments have been turned in on time, how many assignments have been late, how many is she missing, and going from there so that the documentation shows, well, we're not following it, and we cannot have an IEP that is not followed because, by law, it's one thing, but also the time that we're spending, that is passing on, and my child is not making progress. Now we would be asking for some additional instruction time, or something, and to kind of remediate what, my child has fallen behind because you're not waiting for this, all that impact. So we would ask for that as well.
Does that apply to 504s as well, or just IEPs?
504s are, one thing that you can think about when you think of a 504 is there is no way to hold the school accountable for a 504. It's a plan. Let's say you know, and I give two examples, just like the one that Alex gave. One of my sons has ADHD, and he was taking medication, and the medication was at the nurse's office, and he had a 504. So when I went to go refill that medication, the medication was still there. One, why? You know, he has a 504. He's supposed to have access to this medication. There was just the start testing. He was supposed to have this meds. The teacher sent him. The nurse called for him. My son drank water in the middle of the hallway, forgot where he was going, and went back. No, there was no accountability with him. Did he take the medication? I don't know. I sent him, and the nurse was like, why call him? Maybe he was absent. Nobody is taking data on it. Another way you can think about it is my child needs a ramp. Well, my child is in a wheelchair. We provided a ramp. Your child fell off the ramp, you know, the stairs because she tried going down the stairs. Well, we had the ramp. If she didn't use it, it was on her. So that's how, you know, the way that we see a 504 is that we're making it available. If they choose to use it or not, that's not on them. We're not discriminating against him. He can still come, he can still go to the nurse, she can still use the ramp, but if they don't, well, they don't. So that's how we share the 504 to kind of make it a little bit more, well, we there's no discrimination against them, and they're not using it, but there's no guidance, and there's not teaching them how to. There's no data of this is a ramp. This is how you're going to use it. This is, your schedule. This is how you're going to learn how to go to the, there's no follow through with that. It's just, it's available. Use it or not.
What I would say with the 504 is, if your friend or anybody that they're seeing that their child's not making progress with the 504 plan, that gives you the ammunition to, obviously collect your own data, but to bring to the table and say, look, my child's been on this 504 plan and they're not making any progress. And you can use that kind of as, it gives you the green light to say, look, let's pursue special education. Obviously, they can never deny you a special education evaluation. Per law, if you ask for that and you request for it, by law, they have to grant you that. But it just gives you more data on your side to say, look, my child's not making any progress under this plan. Let's pursue the special education route because obviously 504 is not working. So, even though a 504 plan might not be useful, it can be useful in the sense that it's going to give you, again, that data or that evidence, that hardcore fact that my child's not progressing under this 504 plan.
Thank you.
Was there one more question? Yes. Yeah. I think that sums it up. Well, I hope that everybody, you're muted. That's the
story of my life.
Story of our life now. We are muted. Go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you, Girasol and Alex from the Brighton Center for giving us all this useful information today. Also, I want to take time to thank Coloplast and Gordon Hartman Foundation for making all of this possible. And our attendees, thank you for Zooming in, and we wish you all to be safe out there. All right.
Thank you so much for coming. We will be sharing, some information with you guys so that it can be mailed to the parents. So some acronyms, some useful information and tips, as well as our contact information. So thank you for having us, and hope
thank you all for having us. Appreciate it.
Rest of your weekend.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.